How is it that we find ourselves surrounded by such complexity, such elegance?
The genes of you and me, the genes of you and me, we're all made of DNA. We're all made of the same chemical DNA. We're all made of DNA. We're all made of the same.
Hi, you're listening to DNA Today, a podcast and radio show where we discover new advances in the world of genetics. From genetic technology like CRISPR to rare diseases to new research, we have you covered. For a decade, DNA Today has brought you the voices of leaders in genetics. I'm Keira Deneen. I'm a certified genetic counselor and your host. We are thrilled to be launching our Patreon very soon. It might be on a genetics holiday. I'll let you figure that one out. In the meantime, we would appreciate your insight on what you want from the Patreon. It is your last chance to fill out our survey so that we will offer the benefits you want. The survey link is in the show notes on our website, dnatoday.com, and all over our socials. Maybe you really want DNA Today merch, or you'd love to have one-on-one mentorship with me. Maybe you have your own ideas. Whatever your thoughts are, get them in by April 21st, 2023. And thank you for helping to develop our Patreon so it can be the best it can be, and it can be exactly what you want it to be. As a listener of DNA Today, you've probably heard me talk about NIPT, non-invasive prenatal testing, that looks for extra or missing chromosome conditions during pregnancy. But did you know there's also a test that can screen for recessive disorders like cystic fibrosis and fetal antigens? Billion to One offers Unity Screen, which does all of this from one blood draw from a pregnant person. Visit unityscreen.com for more information and check out our DNA Today episodes where Billion to One experts joined me to explore non-invasive prenatal screening for recessive conditions. That was episode 224. And red blood cell fetal antigens. That was episode 225. Want to become a genetic counselor? Looking for ways to engage with the field and boost your resume for grad school applications? Then you should check out Sarah Lawrence's Why Genetic Counseling Wednesday Summer Series. Every Wednesday this June, plus the last Wednesday in May, Sarah Lawrence is hosting a series where you can interact through Zoom with genetic counselors from different specialties. It kicks off on May 31st. You can sign up at slc.edu/DNA Today. Again, visit slc.edu/DNA Today to register to level up your resume for applications in the fall. My guest today is a fellow genetic counselor entrepreneur, Matt Tschirgi. Matt performs contract work through his company, Genetix Consulting, LLC. In addition to being employed at a commercial lab, he has more than 15 years of combined experience in clinical and industry genetic counseling. And Matt, we've been connected on social media for years. I've seen your name pop up, people mention you, but we only recently started chatting when you put a call out to fellow genetic counselors who are entrepreneurs to share their experience because you're pulling together student lectures. So were you surprised with the level of response? Because I started seeing your LinkedIn post and your tweet just blow up.
Yeah. So where this came about was I was putting together a student presentation, and I have my experience, but I'm sure I was like, there's others out there, and I'm sure my audience could benefit to hear from other people. So I'm like, hey, I'm on social media. Why not throw something out there? And so I thought, I might get a couple of responses. And like you said, I hate to say it blew up because it makes me sound like I'm all that, but it blew up. And I already said it though. You said it, so we're good, right? So I was shocked at the amount of people who were interested, who were like, yes, I'd love to share my experience. And it was really neat. It's like, this is what social media is for, is network and collaboration. So I got quite a lot of response. In fact, I got so much response that I had to turn some people away. So it's a good problem to have. And it was really neat to see everybody's experience, how it was a little bit different. And also, this is for a student talk, but I got seasoned genetic counselors who were like, hey, where can I go to this talk too? So I think that was the other unanticipated response, was there's a lot of interest in this content. And I think with the way the market has shifted recently, it's just kind of a perfect storm where a lot of people are interested in this kind of information.
Yeah, and that's how we were like, wait, we should just record a podcast episode
Yeah.
about this just to capture what you found and have a conversation around it. And as you were saying, I think it's really relevant time because of how much change we've seen in genetic counseling positions. I think especially, I would say, the last 6 months, there's been a lot of change, especially in industry. So looking at genetic counselors starting their own companies or having some kind of supplemental income, I mean, it's really great. And you get to be more involved in the genetics community and use your degree in other ways. So before we get into all this awesome data that you're able to collect from people, could you tell us a little bit more about your own, entrepreneurship, your LLC, like your origin story, as I like to say?
So I've been doing contract work for about 10 years. And so at the time I was in prenatal clinic. And so I had a couple of things. I had student loans, and I didn't like my student loans. I don't know anybody who likes their student loans. And I really wanted to get them paid off earlier. And I felt like there were certain skills that were not being tapped. I mean, I love seeing patients, and I still talk to patients at my regular job. So, but I just felt like, gosh, I'm seeing patients and I'm giving patient care, but I thought there was a little bit more to me. And so I just decided to start a side business. And so I, started my LLC, registered with the state, got a tax ID, did all the things, opened a bank account, got my logo from a from a graphic designer. So I did all the things at the beginning. And then I just started throwing myself out there. That's when I really got involved in Twitter and on LinkedIn and social media. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to throw myself out there and see what happens. It was really interesting. It was a bit of a grind because I'm like, okay, here I am, come talk to me. And it did take some time, but I felt like once I got my first client, it was so exciting. It was like, oh my gosh, I can really do this. Like, because you start something, you don't know how successful you're going to be. So it did take some time, but it was super exciting. And then really getting that first client is kind of the toughest part. And then as you get that client, you're like, oh, this is how things work. And then you learn from it. And then you can leverage that. Like, oh, I worked with so-and-so, do you know them? They can vouch for me. And so once you get that first client, it really helps you leverage. And now, I mean, I've been doing it 10 years. And again, at the time I was in clinic. So another great thing about this is one of my clients actually hired me on full time. So that's what allowed me to transition from clinic to industry. And it allowed me to do it in a gradual way rather than going like straight from clinic, headlong into industry. So it was a great segue and a great way to explore new things. So yeah, it was great. And now people approach me and things have ebbed and flowed throughout the years. Sometimes I've been really busy. Other times I actually haven't been doing anything. And that's what's nice is because it's a supplemental. It's not like, oh, if I don't get a contract, my kids aren't going to eat. It is all about having an additional revenue stream and having a little bit more security in addition to your regular employment.
Yeah, a lot of that resonates with me. I think for, the podcast being a business for me, as many people know, with the sponsors that we have, the first 1 or 2 sponsors, that was the toughest. And then once you have that, then they just start you get that groove and you're like, okay, this is what we're doing. This is what I could offer. And one kind of thing is just like fake it till you make it is what I found. Like you kind of just say, they're like, what are your rates? Like, you're just like, I don't know. And that was one thing that I was interested in to look at, starting to get into the data that you have of like, what are genetic counselors charging? And in my opinion, I think a lot of entrepreneurs in genetics are undercharging. I think that's something that, a lot of us could be charging more. But what's the range of fees you saw? I mean, it's kind of, I've seen some of this data that you were able to share with me, and there is quite a range.
Yeah.
And different rate models too.
So as far as the different rates go, there was a really wide range. There's kind of 3 different models as far as the data I collected. There's the hourly rate. And so I believe that's the most simple, right? So you're like, oh, I spent 5 hours on this project. Here's my hourly rate. Here's what you owe me. And I still do that today. So I feel like that's the simplest and the most, easiest. Then people can charge by the project. This can be a bit of a challenge because it's like, okay, we want you to do A, B, and C. Well, is it going to take you 10 hours? Is it going to take you 20 hours? Well, you have to estimate that. What if you underestimate? Well, then you're, getting paid $1 an hour. You don't want that. If you overestimate, well, then you're out of range for like, well, that's way out of our budget. That's a little trickier. I haven't done a lot of that, but I know people who have. Then there's a monthly retainer. This is my favorite. So I've done this once where they paid me a monthly fee. I didn't have to track my hours. They're like, we just want you to answer questions and be available and do projects. And I did put a time limit on it. So it's like, okay, I'll spend so many hours per month. I won't go beyond that. But I don't have to feel bad if I only spent 1 hour that month versus 7 hours. And it's like a third paycheck. So if you can get a retainer, that is actually very ideal because, excuse me, you don't have to keep track of those hours. And sometimes you can end up on the upside. As far as the range goes, so like you said, there is a wide range. And the lowest as far as hourly rate. So there's kind of three tiers. So for your typical contract work, that's going to involve a lot of different things. People reported they were charging between $58 and $250 an hour. So that's a big range. I mean, at the top of that, there's about 5 times difference, give and take. And that's anything from, business development or subject matter expertise or whatever. Somebody said they charge $500 an hour for legal work. And I think, attorneys charge a lot of money. And so if an attorney wants somebody, if there's a, wrongful death or wrongful birth or whatever, the court, and they need somebody with genetics, those attorneys are going to pay very well for somebody who knows their stuff. So that's kind of one of my dreams, actually. I would love to be like an expert witness someday or do that kind of work. Not just for the rate, but also for the experience. I think I would enjoy that. So the top tier was somebody who was charging between $400 and $700 an hour, and or 400 and 700 to be clear. And I don't charge that much. I would love to. And so this person has discovered a niche market, and that's what they are worth, and that's what they're getting. And so, kudos to this person who has found this and is able to do it. So I think genetic counselors should be paid for what we do, and I think we should be paid well. This person has tapped into it, and I think it's great. I wish everybody could charge that much, because what we have to say is valuable, and people are willing to pay top dollar for it in some situations.
And it shows us, for those that, either currently have businesses, consulting, or want to start one, if they're on the lower end of that, I think it's time to raise your rates. And that's something, even just with inflation, we've seen that a lot, that it's time for, having raises, and even in our salary jobs and everything. And so it is very interesting to just see how much the range is. And, I know for myself, I'm also a podcast producer on 2 rare disease podcasts. And so that's hourly. And then for sponsors, that's more sponsorship packages. So then that's more of a project base. So I definitely can see the different advantages to both, depending on what kind it is. But the retainer, I've never had that. So that is really, really cool with that. So, you've been talking about your business. Can you share a little bit like an example of what you offer in terms of your services for a company? Like, what type of skills are you using and services are you offering?
Yeah, so things have really ebbed and flowed over 10 years. So I've done blog posts, like simple, like genetic concepts, because my audience were not in the genetic space. So what is autosomal recessive? What is, that's like, you can do that in your sleep. I've done subject matter expertise, where they wanted a genetic counselor to review marketing materials just to make sure that they're telling the truth and what they're saying is, clinically accurate. One time I was actually at a conference, and they wanted me to go to the booths. They gave me a list of people in the booths, and they want me to do like competitive intelligence. So I was able to talk to people, get their marketing materials, and me as an independent contractor, I was able to get that information. So that was kind of fun. So just, go to the booths and get some information. I've done they've had, there was a company putting out a carrier screening product. They wanted a list of disease descriptions. So that's a little bit into the weeds, but really it's providing your clinical expertise. So I was in clinic. I saw patients for a long time, and I think that lens is really important to some pharma companies and some other larger companies where, hey, we want to put out this medical device. We want to put out this test. How do you think, if you were going to order this test, is it worth it? And then they really want your honesty. You don't have to be a yes person where you're like, yes, everything's
They're paying
amazing.
you to
Say,
be like,
well,
no,
actually,
change this,
yeah,
update that. Yeah.
exactly. So those are some things, but that's just me. Like I said, the people that I talked to did a variety of different things besides what I just told you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, even sometimes there's a random opportunity. A few years ago, I don't even know what the title would be, but I basically read this genetic novel and went through and made sure that everything that was mentioned, it's science fiction, but like, is it accurate in terms of like what they're referencing? So that was something cool. I love to read books, as everybody knows. I love interviewing authors on the show. So I was like, wait, you're going to pay me to read this book and let you know, like, there was one thing they said BRACA, because like BRCA, right? People hear BRCA, so they spell it out. I'm like, actually, it's BRCA. And different things of saying like, oh, like you have the gene for that. It's like, well, everybody has that gene, but it's the variant. So little things like that. So there's just so many random opportunities out there where we can use our skills. And even you said earlier, like you find that doing consulting work, you end up being able to use a lot more of your skills, but also pull from your genetic counseling experience in terms of patient care and even now in industry. What did people end up sharing in your own experience of like what types of skills have transferred well into this entrepreneur space?
Yeah, so I mean, being detail oriented, being able to research. I mean, we all do research. Some of us have published in the literature. That is a skill, going through and looking at the literature and teasing things out. And just because something is published, how was the study performed? Was it really designed well? And so being detail oriented. I mean, all of those things, advocating for patients, all of those skills are really transferable. And I don't have an MBA. There's lots of GCs who do, and there's nothing wrong with that. So and sometimes I wish I had an MBA. I mean,
Same.
it'd be nice to get some additional training. But I've been able to plow my way through without any business training, without an MBA. And so those skills as a genetic counselor, just like, oh, I can go from prenatal to cancer to peds to marketing to industry to whatever. Same thing. You don't have to take new classes. It's just how do you apply those skills in new ways?
Yeah, I think that's very well said. And you're just figuring out, a lot of it is just figuring it out. Like, I don't have a degree in marketing, but I've been doing marketing for like 12 years just through podcasting and then working with different clients and doing things. And oftentimes there is this intersection where people are like, oh, you actually know healthcare and genetics. You could really help us market this. And just in terms of full-time positions, we see genetic counselors that are in marketing. And
Yep.
looking at different genetic labs, and like it's really important to get that genetic counselor perspective because we understand what patients understand in that level, and that
Yeah.
education level can be really important. It's like you were saying, like marketing materials, different things there. Non-invasive prenatal testing screening has been around for a decade now, as long as DNA Today actually, and the technology has evolved in those 10 years. The screening started to detect Down syndrome, and now Billion-to-One's Unity screen assesses for the chance for pregnancies to have aneuploidies, which are extra or missing chromosome conditions, recessive conditions like cystic fibrosis and sickle cell, and the presence of red blood cell fetal antigens. Billion-to-One named the screening Unity Screen as it brings together fetal screening for aneuploidies and recessive conditions. It also represents uniting pregnant patients in more equitable care. Unity does not require a blood sample from the other biological parent or sperm donor to assess fetal risk, enabling more pregnancies at risk to be affected with recessive conditions to be identified earlier in pregnancy as compared to traditional carrier screening. Billion-to-One is working towards one goal: to detect disease one molecule at a time. Know early with one simple blood test. Visit unityscreen.com for more information. And be sure to check out our DNA Today episodes, where Billion to One experts join me to explore non-invasive prenatal screening for recessive conditions. That's episode 224. And red blood cell fetal antigens. That's episode 225. As many of you know, through podcasting, I've become an entrepreneur, including consulting for other podcasts. Since I don't have a business degree, I've learned a lot through podcasts like Porch Talks. The inspiration to start this show was from the host, Melissa Bradley, who wanted to inform, instruct, and inspire fellow entrepreneurs, especially people who identify as women, people of color, immigrants, veterans, people with disabilities, and folks in the LGBTQIA+ community, which drew me initially. So if you're thinking about starting a business or just love hearing stories about how businesses grow, Porch Talks is for you. Search Porch Talks in your podcast player or use the links in the show notes to start listening. If you're applying to genetic counseling grad schools in the near future, I highly recommend checking out Sarah Lawrence's Why Genetic Counseling Wednesday Summer Series. This is the 4th year Sarah Lawrence will be hosting this series, where you can interact through Zoom with genetic counselors from different specialties for 2 hours every Wednesday in June. It actually kicks off on Wednesday, May 31st at noon Eastern. As many of you know, I graduated from Sarah Lawrence's program 3 years ago, and this series was a fun way to interact with prospective genetic counseling students, and I'm really looking forward to meeting more of you during this series. Myself and fellow genetic counselors will share about our roles and answer your questions live. Not only will you hear from GCs in a variety of specialties, you'll also have the opportunity to discuss ethical and social implications of genomic medicine, engage with current students, and learn about the exciting present and projected future of the profession. Anyone who attends all 5 will earn a certificate of completion and receive an application fee waiver for the grad program in the fall. Register now before we are fully booked. Go to slc.edu/DNA today. Again, that's slc.edu/DNA today to be part of this interactive genetic counseling experience. And I wanted to circle back to something you said earlier. So you mentioned that you've been able to do this, as like a side project almost. It's a side business that you do have a full-time job with a commercial lab. And in 2021, I know in particular was a tough year for a lot of genetic counselors, where they either had reduced hours and income. And so they were looking to supplement some of that income. And then, a lot of people found, oh, wait, I can continue doing this with a full-time job. Would you be open to sharing your experience and how, especially during that year of 2021, of how your LLC played a role in this and kind of having this be like a side project?
So, like you said, right now, the genetic testing industry has experienced a contraction. And I really feel like it started in the summer of 2021. So I was working for a commercial lab and as a lab genetic counselor doing contract work, and they exited the genetic testing space. And so they laid off about 300 people, about 40% of the workforce, 30 genetic counselors. Now, we've all heard this story over and over and over, unfortunately, to some degree or another. But really, summer of 21, I feel like was the first lab that really was the first domino to fall. And so, so I'm scrambling. 30 of us are all now looking for a job. And so, I was doing contract. I had a couple of clients at the time, and one of the first things I did was I reached out to those clients. I said, "Hey, my job situation just changed. So I'm looking for full-time work. Do you have additional contract work that I can do to kind of help me out here? Do you have other clients?" Because like I said, because it's a side business, I'm pretty casual, but my casualty went out the window because I am now, in 60 days, I need to find something regular. So, and I actually had some of my colleagues approach me like, "Hey, we know you do contract work. Tell us what you do." And I was happy to share with them, but when times are tough, that's not the time to start the side business. The time to start the side business is earlier. So you've got that in place for when tough times hit. So I was able to obtain additional contract work. I was able to get a full-time job, and I felt a little less stressed because I had another stream of revenue already going.
It's interesting that a lot of people that you were collecting data from, that this was not their primary source of income. For most people, this was like a second revenue stream, as you were mentioning, which is kind of nice to have that, not only for while you have a full-time job, but in that case, like you were talking about, where, there are layoffs and you're like, well, now I still have some kind of income there. In terms of how many hours people are working on this, what's the range you saw there?
Yeah. So again, kind of three tiers. So a lot of people said 3 to 6 hours a week. And then there was 5 to 10 hours, so a little bit more. And the most extreme example was 40 to 50 hours. And so,
Which, that, at least if there was only one person, that would have been me. So,
well, since you
I'll
said
out
it,
myself.
right? So, yeah. So most people, because it's a supplemental, I'm more of a 3 to 6 hours a week kind of guy, just because of where I'm at in my family. But I have had times where there have been deadlines and it's been kind of disruptive. And so again, because it's supplemental, you can pick and choose, and you're like, oh, I don't want to do that. Or if I'm going to be, if there's a short deadline and I have to rearrange my life, then I'm going to charge a premium. So you've got some flexibility there.
Yeah, I think that's well said, and it definitely does ebb and flow. Even for this show, sometimes I'll have a bunch of recordings and then I won't for a few weeks. So, it definitely is kind of an average and what you have going on in life. Like, I'll block my calendar certain times to be like, I'm not recording. So it's something that really is versatile in that sense, because you're your own boss when you're doing consulting work. Like, you can say, no, I'm not available.
Yep.
And that's just such a great thing. What else did people say that they loved about having their own business and consulting and doing this type of work?
So a big theme that, and it aligns with my origin story, as you say, is that people get to explore new things. So people, I think, get bored, for lack of a better term. Like, gosh, I've been doing this for a while. I really want to explore something new, and I'm just gonna see how this goes. And I think that was the biggest theme was, hey, I see cancer patients at day. I do graphic design at night. I see prenatal patients at day. I do variant curation at night. So, or whatever. So, and some people can even see patients as a part of contract work, because there are telehealth companies out there who want licensed genetic counselors. And if you're licensed in multiple states and you want to see patients, that's a pretty good gig. So, but what's really neat is like, oh, maybe I see prenatal patients and I want to switch to cancer patients. So I'll try doing some contract work seeing cancer patients, or IVF, or pick your specialty. So it's a really great way to try something new, dip your toe in the water. And if you don't like it, you're like, I did it for a few weeks and gosh, it really wasn't what I wanted. Nobody, you're not, nothing's written in stone. You said you're your own boss. If you want to quit, you can quit. Or if you want to change course, you can change course. That's what's great.
Yeah, instead of saying, like, in my case, I practice prenatal. So if I was like, I kind of want to switch to, like, fertility, that would kind of be a natural transition. We see a lot of people do that in the field. But I'm like, I don't know, what if I don't like it? Instead of, quitting
Exactly.
my job and then getting a new job and being like, now I hate this. Now I'm stuck in this for a while. I can be like, why don't I just test the waters and do, some like working for one of these telehealth companies and doing a couple patients at night. I'm sure they love genetic counselors that have availability in the evening, because that's when patients want to do their appointments. So
Yeah.
everybody wins. I mean,
Especially with like the different time zones. I mean, if you're an early bird, like, and for me, the work that I've done is I need the flexibility. So if I wake up early in the morning and it's a couple hours and I have the energy, I'm like, hey, I'll put some time into a project. So I chose not to see patients because I'm like, I'm seeing patients, at the time I was like, I'm seeing patients at the day. I don't want to start a business where I'm doing the same thing. But it might work out for somebody else to see patients. But I really like the flexibility of non-clinical contract work where, I'm not attending meetings. I'm just, most of it's via email. There might be a couple of introductory calls for a project, but then you're on your own time and you have a deadline, and you can, if you work on it at midnight or 6 a.m. or whenever, it's just, you just want to be careful as far as like, okay, not using regular time, not using your employer's resources, making sure you're not doing contract work for a competitor. So I'm completely transparent with my supervisor, and I think that's really important. And so yeah, I mean, because when I started off in clinical, I didn't have any conflict of interest. I chose not to do contract work for the lab I was ordering testing from. That was more of an ethical boundary that I didn't want to cross, rather than a legal boundary. But I let my supervisor know I want to do contract work. Well, then when I transitioned to industry, my client list shrunk considerably because they didn't want me doing contract work. And again, I was transparent. And then working for a larger commercial lab, my client list is very, very small, and that's okay. It's again supplemental, something to do on the side.
Yeah, I mean, when I was getting the job I have now, this is the same job that I'm in straight out of grad school. And so during my interview with my now boss, I was like, he had discovered me through the podcast here and LinkedIn and everything. And so I was like, to be clear, like I am planning on continuing the podcast. We do have sponsors. And so I made that clear in my interview, which maybe you don't do that. I don't know. I don't know if that's really good advice, but at some point, bring it up if you're already in a position to bring that up to your boss, your supervisor, to say, like I am doing work on the side, because you don't want them like coming across that on social media. I feel like it's better just to mention it to them and make sure that it's not a competitor, like you're saying.
Yeah.
I think that's a really important one. And it's, go ahead, Matt.
No, I've had people approach me, and I'm like, this isn't going to work. So I've just and so I've been able to just say, it seems like you're in competition with my employer, and I just don't think that's a good situation. There have been some situations with my previous employer where I didn't think they were going to approve, and they did. And then there were other situations that I thought was a no-brainer, and they declined it. So, I think it's important to have that transparency, and because you don't want to bite the hand that feeds you.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's good, especially if you're keeping your two roles going with everything. Well, this has just been so great. It's just really fun to dive into this because obviously this is something I'm passionate about, of just, seeing more and more entrepreneurs. I mean, you're really OG. You said 10 years ago, something like that?
Yeah, about 10 years ago.
Yeah. So yeah, that's you're probably one of the first genetic counselors that was an entrepreneur. Because this podcast 10 years old, but we were not making money 10 years ago. So many years I was just doing it for fun, and I still do it for fun. It's just an added bonus that we have sponsors and everything. But any advice for people that are more on the end of starting businesses, and any advice that either if you could go back to yourself or like, oh, I did this really well, I would make sure other people do that again?
Yeah, I would say don't be afraid to open a business. So I've talked to people who say, oh yeah, I do contract work on the side, but I don't have a business. And I would really encourage people to get a business. It provides a layer of legal protection. It also provides some tax benefits. And so I would say it also gives legitimacy. So if you're like, hey, I'm Matt, I do contract work, they're like, oh, okay, great. They'll forget your name in 5 seconds. So if you're like, oh, I'm the founder and managing director of Genetix Consulting LLC, they're like, oh, okay, that commands a little bit more respect. So I would say now it's a little bit of well, it is some extra work, but it's simple. Like if I could do it like back in the day when I'm like, well, I'll figure this out on my own, and me and Google, we figured it out. If I can do this with the amount of success that I've had, anybody listening to this can. So I would say if you're going to do contract work, get your LLC, get your business started, and because there's a lot of benefits to that.
Yeah, especially the tax benefits. Like I recently hired an accountant because things were getting a little over my head with taxes and international companies and everything. And my accountant jokes like everybody should have an LLC.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like tax wise, there's a lot of advantages to it. And there's certain things you can, write off your taxes and different advantages there. And like you said, it kind of separates you. You're dealing with an LLC, and it kind of puts all your contracting work together. So for my LLC, DNA Today LLC, like, I'm based in Connecticut. I pay like $85 a year to the state of Connecticut to keep that running. And it wasn't, I don't remember now how expensive it was to start, but you're talking about maybe a couple $100. So, it's very feasible to do. And it's easy for the first few years. I did all the taxes myself and figured it out. And I'm not a financial person. And so, yeah, if Matt and I can figure it out, you guys can too. But I think that's fantastic advice. And for students listening, this was something that you put out there and you had people respond to you. You collected data. I would love to see this be someone's capstone project in the future. I think that would be really cool. I'm kind of putting Matt on the spot here, but I think that would be cool. I would be interested in being involved in that, and if Matt had the bandwidth and everything.
Yeah.
But I think it'd be cool to see this, be an official project and even like published or something in Perspectives or Journal of Genetic Counseling or something, because I hope to see many more genetic counseling businesses popping up.
I agree. And I hadn't really thought of a capstone project because a lot of people have, like I said, when I threw it out on social media, I had so many people come up with me with so many ideas that I didn't even think about. And a student capstone would be awesome. And again, it's the graduate programs are focusing on clinic and psychosocial, which they should, but especially with the contraction in the genetic testing space, it's like, what is the economics of genetics? Why are all these labs, doing reductions in forces? And what are some things we can do to mitigate that? And one of the things that you can do is you can start your own business. And so if somebody can get into grad school at genetic counseling, because it is, as everybody knows, it is so tough to get into grad school. If you have the skills to get into graduate school for genetic counseling, you have the skills to run a side business, hands down.
Yes, I agree. The getting into grad school part was much harder than starting an LLC. That was just kind of like, all right, you Google it, like Matt was saying, and you kind of figure it out. And, I talked to a couple people that I knew had businesses to kind of help me and everything, because it was a few years ago. But yeah, it's not that hard. And I think that's a great, way to put it and everything. But thank you for being just so open and just sharing everything. And, hopefully we have you back on the show for something down the line, maybe someone's capstone project. And we're like, hey, we had this conversation back in 2023 and look at it now. But thank you so much, Matt. You're someone that I've kind of wanted to have on the show for a while, and I'm so glad this came to fruition.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
For more information about today's episode, visit dnapodcast.com, where you can also stream all episodes of the show. We encourage your questions, comments, guest pitches, and ideas. Send them all into info@dnapodcast.com. Search DNA Today on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, so you can connect with us there. And a favor, please rate and review the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. This truly helps us climb the charts and allow more genetic nerds like yourself to find the show. DNA Today is hosted and produced by myself, Keir Deneen. Our social media lead is Corinne Merlino. Our video lead is Amanda Andrioli. Thanks for listening, and join us next time to discover new advances in the world of genetics.
The genes of you and me, the genes of you and me, are all made of DNA. We're all made of the same chemical DNA. We're all made